Hello. Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Sawubona. Welcome all. Good afternoon. Delighted that we have all of you here, and I imagine there are many more online, as well as those who will be coming in. I'm glad we're here in the coolness of this hot afternoon, and I'm just grateful for everyone coming together. My name is Asha George. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a professor here at the School of Public Health at the University of the Western Cape. I'm very excited to be able to convene and facilitate the David Sanders Lecture. I hold the chair, the Sarchi Chair in Health Systems, Complexity and Social Change, which is involved in convening this lecture with support from the NRF. I want to welcome Professor Robert Balfour, our Rector and Vice Chancellor, Professor Anita Padmanabhanuni. She's the Dean of our Faculty of Community and Health Sciences, Professor Sue Falkus, representing, and Lisa, representing the David Sanders family. All our colleagues from the People's Health Movement, I'm really glad you're here and you have a front row in this commemoration of David Sanders' legacy and values. So welcoming all other dignitaries, staff, students, colleagues, and friends. All protocol and pronouns observed. I just want to thank everyone. Today is a very special day in celebrating the values that David Sanders lived his life with. And it's now more important than ever if we think of what the world is going through, the multiple crises, globally, nationally, globally, and even at a planetary level. David was the founder of our school. He's an eminent researcher, but he was a tireless global advocate for people's health and a champion for communities here locally as well as abroad. Whenever you go anywhere and you say you're at the School of Public Health at the University of the Western Cape, people will often say, "Oh, you worked with David." It is remarkable, his reach, not just with communities locally, but communities globally. He had an infectious passion and a really insightful sense of politics. He had his finger on so many different issues, and he connected the dots across causes and constituencies. So it's a real honor to have this lecture commemorating what he stood for and an opportunity to celebrate conversations, bring together people around the causes of social justice, which were so close to his heart. Last year, our esteemed speaker, Fatima Hassan, reflected on the lessons learned in holding governments accountable, governments and pharmaceutical companies accountable for their role in what happened during the pandemic. And she also linked those efforts to solidarity movements needed given the wars in Gaza, Sudan, Ukraine. Those issues are still going on today, and things have even gotten much worse. And I think you have moments where you have glimmers of hope, and then Machiavellian interests rise up again. And I think that's why I was talking with Sue, and I think it's about time we recognize war in public health, war as a commercial determinant of health. We focus on nutrition, global companies, we focus on alcohol and tobacco, but I think now the vested interests that are behind keeping these conflicts going and really sidelining international law is something that would be close to David's heart and raising concern over that. And that's part of public health, needs to engage in these issues And he would say also review its complicity sometimes in how these issues are framed, and public health has a role in speaking out. And so linking those issues that are happening globally to the speaker we have today, I want to just say a quote from Desmond Tutu, which I think is really powerful in making these linkages. He said, "When we see others as the enemy, we risk becoming what we hate. When we oppress others, we end up oppressing ourselves. All of our humanity is dependent upon recognizing the humanity in others." And that quote, for me, ties things what are happening globally with the issues that we're going to talk about today, that we're really delighted that Kevin's here to speak about. This quote is true in terms of how communities are paying the price in terms of the brutality of war and the actions and non-actions of states, but also in terms of the tremendous ideological backlash that's happening in terms of the anti-gender and anti-rights movement. These movements are funded in large part by extreme right elements in the USA and Europe. And it's insidious because it's almost a recolonialism, because it's cloaked, these anti-gender and anti-rights elements cloak themselves in the language and discourse of decoloniality and resistance to Western powers. And that's how it has been hard to push back, because they wear the cloak of framing what is African, what is cultural, what can't be changed. And I think that's why, as public health advocates, we need to engage in that narrative of where is our humanity, and how do we recognize these issues and bring public health evidence to the fore. It's not just the backlash, but it's also the funding cuts that are linked to that ideological backlash combined with rising debts has really meant a complete closure of services for marginalized communities. For the LGBTI population, there have been programs that funded health workers, trained them. All those programs have been shut down. And the stigma, the public discourse around this topic has been so vitriolic, it has led to a lot less access as people have felt renewed anxiety and fear in communities. Closer to home in South Africa, there's a willingness in the public sector, and I'm delighted to see colleagues from the Western Cape. Our colleagues from Khayelitsha from the Western Cape government was here. We had this amazing dialogue last Friday on how they're supporting their own health workers on working on this issue. But there's a lot in terms of really knowing at a systems level, how do we incorporate not just training health providers, but improving the referral pathways, what needs to be done at a health systems level to make sure services are inclusive. And part of the reason we invited Kevin here today is because we feel strongly that public health, and indeed my field, health systems, has a role in talking about social justice, but also social justice linked to LGBTQI issues. SOPH and UWC has a tremendous role. We train so many health workers, and it was wonderful at that dialogue in Khayelitsha last Friday. We had a nurse who was trained here, who was such a champion, and she spoke about how she appreciated how UWC was a place that opened up her world in terms of diversity. We have a role in terms of how we train nurses and other health workers. We have a role in terms of the public health advocates that we train through our master's program. There's civil society advocates that come out of our school and future policymakers in South Africa and across the continent, because almost half our PhD program is with people outside of South Africa, across the continent. So I'm hoping, given this role that we can play, this conversation tonight is the beginning of many more conversations of how do we incorporate LGBTQI issues as part of a rights agenda, as part of a social justice agenda that is a core part of UWC. So I really want to thank everyone for coming here, and I can think of no one better to talk about UWC's roles as the rector who's joining us here today. So I'm going to introduce and welcome Professor Robert Balfour, who's our rector and vice chancellor, to say a few words as we kick off this afternoon. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Prof. Usher George, and it's really wonderful that we have the Saatchi Chair in this area of focus in the school, and also that you are facilitating this evening's event. Thank you for your role in that capacity as well. I want to formally welcome our students who are present, our colleagues, and of course our distinguished guests. This is my first annual David Sanders Lecture in Public Health and Social Justice, and I'm really delighted to be able to be with you tonight, to celebrate the event, to commemorate the memory, and also to listen with interest to Kevin's remarks that will be shared with us. I want to acknowledge Professor Sue Forkas, the researcher, doctor, obstetrician, and wife of late Emeritus Professor David Sanders, whose presence reminds us of a personal and professional legacy that is part of UWC. Thank you also to Lisa, who came along this evening. We really appreciate you being here with your mum. Also to recognize the leadership of our Dean in our environment, Prof. Anita Padmana Benuni, the Dean of the Faculty of Community and Health Sciences, Professor Olagoke Akintola, the Director of the school, who welcomed me as I entered this evening. He said, "Welcome to our School for Public Health." I thought, "Professor, welcome to our School for Public Health." And of course, Prof. George, who holds the Saatchi Chair in Health Systems Complexity and Social Change, and under whose leadership this lecture series continues to thrive. Thank you, Tamlin, and to Truma from the Dean's Office and the whole team that organized and made possible this evening's get-together. About the lecture and its purpose, we recognize that this honors the life and work of Professor David Sanders, founder of the school at UWC. He showed that scholarship and activism can coexist, and this is so important at UWC, where we consider activism to have a basis in our research, to have a place in our curriculum, to be part of that training of what it means to become a professional is to have a consciousness that enables you to intervene in matters of social justice where you see these are important in the context of the profession. I think that emphasis cannot be underestimated in our teaching, cannot be underestimated as part of our DNA at UWC, and it made for a compelling reason for me, in fact, to apply to become Vice Chancellor at this university way back in 2023. Our theme this evening is decriminalizing homosexuality and supporting LGBTIQA+ rights in African public health, the why and the how. It reminds us just in that formulation that social justice must include a full recognition of human rights and diversity. Earlier this year, I reflected in an interview on what it was like to grow up as a young gay adolescent in South Africa of the 1980s. I said then that if you dared to come out, you risked your life. I witnessed that violence in our schooling system, the violence after our schooling system, in our higher education system. This has all been well documented in reports such as the Crane-Sudeen, the Sudeen report. That experience also creates fear, of course, in our society, fear for otherness, fear about the consequences of being othered. And so I'm really delighted this evening that we have among us an organization such as the People's Health Movement, who testify to the importance of witness, the importance in testimony, in countering fear, in countering stigma, and of course in making profound the meaning of social justice in our lived reality. So to the pink ladies and gentlemen in our midst this evening, thank you very much for being with us. It's what I would call pink power. I'm not sure we would mean the same thing necessarily by pink power, but it is wonderful that you are able to be with us this evening as well. At university, I've realized that our spaces and perceptions in relation to identity and health won't change unless we are open about the conversation. Change does not happen in secluded, darkened rooms, in whispers of fear and dread to ourselves. Change happens in an open and courageous conversation that leads to action. And tonight is one of the actions of the faculty that celebrate what that can mean in terms of change. Across our continent, many still face exclusion simply because of who they are. Until that changes, our work as educators, as citizens, as professionals in the health environment remains cogent, remains relevant, remains unfinished. These reflections remind us that justice is a public health matter. It's not only about access to care, it's also very much about creating a world where you can live and experience care as a form of justice, as a form of dignity. Founded in 1993, this particular school, UWC's School of Public Health, has earned a strong reputation, I would in fact say a stellar reputation in our sector for postgraduate training that focuses on equity and community engagement. With 2 South African Research Chairs initiatives, the SARCHI Chairs, as well as the South African Research Medical Council Extramural Unit, and more than 140 public health and 50 PhD students. This is one of our schools which demonstrates that scholarship can inform and change and serve public society. Inform and change and serve. So we celebrate a living tradition and we link it to the legacy of inequality in our environment and our commitment to social justice as a way of changing ourselves and our spaces. It also includes meaningful opportunities for women, LGBTIQA+ individuals and first-generation students who come to UWC, who find it as a place of inclusion and belonging. And their inclusion is both a moral imperative and a path to redress for us. Tonight's theme reminds us that health justice is, as I said, not only about treatment and access. It's very much about inclusion and respect. And where health justice thrives, other forms of justice become possible. Professor Sanders believed that public health is inseparable from politics, from the economic forces that influence society. His approach was practical in as much as it was intellectual. It was advocacy in as much as it was reform. He understood that health equity cannot be achieved without confronting inequality itself, and that insight remains relevant for us today. So to the organizers and the wonderful team who made this possible tonight, a very heartfelt note of thank you from my side. It is in this month, which is Pride Month in South Africa, that LGBTIQA+ rights come very close to our hearts. It's also in this week, Kevin, that we are launching Queer Dubs at UWC on Friday, which is the staff association for queer people. UWC is also celebrating in this year 30 years of women and gender studies. It was the first university to have founded such a department 30 years back, and also the first to have a gender equity unit. So in the launch of Queer Queer Dubs this week, we are in fact adding another element to the foundation of UWC, committed as it is to gender rights, human rights. I remember when I addressed a conference, and this is my final remark, in 2012 to an organization known as HERPNET. It was an organization concerned with transformation in Africa of the higher education sector. And I gave a talk, Kevin, about leadership and sexuality. And the memory of colleagues from across the African continent who came up to me after that talk to say, had they given that talk, had I given that talk in their spaces, I might well not have been alive. I might well have been imprisoned. So although we have the good fortune, although we have this wondrous space this evening to talk about freedom in relation to rights, we must recognize that these are always tangential, that these are always attenuated by the political and rights regimes in which we operate on this continent, and which are frequently taken away in as much as they are extended. So on that note, I want to welcome everybody to the event. We look so forward to your remarks, Kevin, and to hand over then to Prof. Sue as the next speaker. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to echo the welcome that's already been given by Asher George and the Rector to everybody here today, those who are in the building, those who are online, and I think there's quite a lot of people online beyond the African continent, so welcome to everyone. As a family, we really do appreciate being involved in the David Sanders Lecture. Coming here every year, it's very special for us. It's obviously sad, but very, very special. We in a way feel David's presence in this room and in this building, which is just part of all that he built with you at the School of Public Health around a more political approach to public health. So it's an important event for us. We would particularly like to welcome Kevin, who's come all the way from Kenya, and so grateful that you kindly accepted this invitation to give this lecture in honor of David. I think it's very important that we thank UWC School of Public Health that they continue the annual David Sanders Lecture. I don't know how long it's been going for, but it actually preceded David's death. So it's been going on for about 10 years, I'm not sure. And that you do it with such energy and arrange it so beautifully. And particularly, I'd like to thank you for the way you put so much thought into identify the topics and the speakers, and always let me be involved in that process. And I think the way you choose the topics and speakers reflects all the issues that David found so important and guided his life's work. And many have been mentioned already: the health equity, truth-telling, social activism with civil society. And I think, as the Rector said, he did have this amazing ability to combine the academic project with grassroots struggle, which I think was quite unique. I think these values are really exemplified by our speaker today, Kevin Mwachiro. He will be introduced in detail after me, but I've read you the profile, and I would just like to say how humbled I feel at your courage, at speaking your truth as a Kenyan queer activist, as a journalist, the way you cover people's stories and narratives in often what's are really difficult situations, in your tireless advocacy for LGBTQI issues, in what is a very dangerous environment, as was illustrated in the previous talk. And I think more recently, the way you've shared your life journey with cancer and how that intersected with everything. So I just wanted to say personally, I admire your courage and look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Asha. Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to the School of Public Health. My name is Fini Oware. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at the School of Public Health. Today I have the honor and privilege of introducing the speaker for this year's David Sanders Lecture, Kevin Mwachiro. Since I knew I had this responsibility, I read a bit of Kevin's work and also did some online stalking, which Kevin has since said, it's fine as long as I'm not stalking him in person. But I've come to find Kevin's work to be very courageous, inspiring, and groundbreaking, telling the stories and making visible the experiences of those with marginalized sexual orientations and gender identities in a context where such identities are often denied and where such stories can remain in the shadows. Kevin Mwachiro is a Kenyan writer, podcaster, queer activist, and journalist whose media and communications career spans more than 2 decades. He began as a journalist with the BBC, contributing to its radio, television, and digital platforms. A self-described custodian of people's stories, Kevin is deeply committed to amplifying marginalized voices. This commitment is reflected in several of his outstanding works. His debut book, Invisible, Stories from Kenya's Queer Community, was the first of its kind in the country, breaking ground in documenting queer narratives. He later led the editorial team for the publications We've Been Here, a moving collection that shares the stories of LGBTQI Kenyans over 50 and the anthology of rainbow childhoods. Kevin was also part of the team behind Boldly Queer, and African perspectives on same-sex, sexuality, and gender diversity. This is a rich collection of articles, essays, stories, and photographs that highlight a growing understanding of LGBTQI rights, struggles, and realities on the African continent. As a writer and cultural commentator, Kevin contributes to various media outlets and literary journals, offering nuanced and courageous perspectives on LGBTQI issues in Kenya and across Africa. He was a guest editor for the Commonwealth Foundation online magazine, Ada Stories, Remember to Rest edition, further cementing his role as a thoughtful curator of African and other global South voices. In 2017, Kevin launched Nipe Story, which in Swahili, Nipe is a Swahili word that translates, give me or tell me a story, a storytelling podcast that brings African short fiction to life through audio and has since been added to my podcast collection. He's also the co-founder of the Out Film Festival, East Africa's first LGBTQI film festival, which we should all be part of when we're in East Africa. I find Kevin's work to be highly relevant to those of us in public health. His work portrays queer lives in their fullness, telling complex and humanizing stories. For example, how queer people navigate aging or chronic illness. This highlights intersecting forms of stigma that queer people may face within health systems and in society overall that may influence their health outcomes. Kevin holds a degree from Daystar University in Kenya and a master's in radio production from Bournemouth University in the UK. He's also an alumnus of the Rockefeller Foundation Bellagio Center residency program. It is a profound honor to introduce Kevin Mwachiro, a fellow Kenyan and speaker for this year's David Sanders Lecture. Karibu, Kevin.
Yetu. Forward. I needed that. Hey, ngiyabonga kakhulu, ngiyabonga. As we say in Kenya, asante. Asante sana. Thank you all for being here. Can't believe you're talking about that, Kevin. I was wondering, who is this guy? Thank you all once again. And I'll say it in Kiswahili, and there'll be smutterings of Kiswahili along this presentation. I want to say karibuni, which is welcome. And once again, asante sana for having me. My appreciation to the School of Public Health here at the University of Western Cape for inviting me to deliver the 2025 David Sanders Lecture in Public Health and Social Justice, for all those emails, conversations, and logistics that got me here. I want to say asante sana. And I also want to say about the room, it felt very Kenyan as well. And I'll tell you why. You know, these fabrics here, these ones, these are Kenyan fabrics. You know, we call them lesos or kangas. And you'll hear me reference my grandmother. And I remember, and we call her Nyanya, my late grandmother, Nyanya, and Kiswahili's grandmother. And within the culture on the coast, almost all women would have a leso. They call it a gora, which is 2 pairs. So if someone gave you 2 pairs, they knew what they were doing, you know? So there's a pair that you wrap around your waist, and there's a pair that is draped over. And in some cases where there are family functions, there's always, you'll see lesos being chucked out of handbags in case there's a chore that needs to be done. So for those of you who curated this space and making it feel at home, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. And the beautiful thing about these lesos is the proverb at the bottom of it. And sometimes that is where the magic is. And this one says, ukipenda miti, penda na mizizi yake, which means if you like the tree, also like its roots. And that reminded me of the foremost lover of trees in Kenya, the late Professor Wangari Maathai. And I thank you that that is there, and that is a proverb that is there. I feel rooted. I feel rooted here by the warm welcome that I have received from all of you. I feel rooted in South Africa because there's a part of me that feels at home here. And I think a little bit about history before I go into this. I'm trying to calm my nerves back. I have heritage that comes from Malawi. My great-great-grandfather was a freed slave from Malawi who was settled in Kenya somehow, I think, in the late 19th century. But everywhere south of Tanzania, when we do come to Southern Africa, we feel at home. So I think it is a connection to the South. So, ngiyabonga, asante. Now we've had the singing, let's have the talking. I am a storyteller. I love listening to people's stories, collecting them, and also telling my own story. I describe myself as a custodian of people's story. So I want to invite you to a storytelling session and not just a lecture. Here's the first story. Fini, I need your help with this one. Hadithi, hadithi. Hadithi, hadithi. And that's how we start storytelling back home. So it's basically story time, come stories, you know. So maybe now you've got the grift, right? So Fini, you want to lead the grift, yeah? Hadithi, hadithi. So it's hadithi and Joe. So we'll start again. Hadithi, hadithi. Hadithi, hadithi. Asanteni. Yesterday, I was over the moon. I got the results of my first HIV test, and they were negative. I was excited. I was happy, and it felt like I was given a second lease of life. I wanted to share it with people, but unfortunately, there was no one. I called Rose, and it felt good to tell her. I'm glad, and I hope I can continue to be negative and live right. I was reckless and stupid. The doctor on the day offered me condoms, and I refused. He encouraged me to take them, but I refused because I was not driven by sex. Not that I'll never have sex. I know I'm different because I'm not driven by it. At least I hope I'm not. I can do it on my own strength. I'm a lot more sexually aware of myself and know that there are other options available for me to have sex. I'm conscious that I'm drawn to it, but I can do that by myself, protecting myself, but need to be aware of that and trust God to be my strength. This talk will be personal, so guys, be ready. That was an extract from a journal that I made in November 2004. I was not yet out, and I discovered the pleasures of anonymous casual sex. I was on the DL, the down low, which was why I had taken the test. This was at what was a GUM clinic, that is genitourinary medicine clinic, that was situated at the NHS Pool Hospital in Dorset, Southern England. The GUM clinic was a godsend. It offered the safety, privacy, and medical attention that was needed for this 31-year-old closeted Christian man who was in the throes of living a double life. Rose, whom I mentioned, was my therapist and was one of the few people who knew about this tug-of-war that I was in. I will confess, there were many more future visits to that clinic because there were many more casual and anonymous sexual encounters. I'd always wished a similar clinic would eventually be set up within our health system in Kenya. But back then, I considered myself lucky, conflicted, but lucky. Safety and privacy were key elements that that clinic gave me. I felt safe with my dirty little secrets. I was happy being a number who could get tested, collect condoms if I was brave enough, and to receive vaccine shots. My experience of the NHS, and more so during a confusing and difficult time of my life, revealed to me the benefits of a good and relatively efficient working health system. And now for some good news. 21 countries on our continent don't have laws against homosexual acts, homosexuality, or criminalize the existence of queer or LGBTQ community or the LGBTQ community. As an African media person and activist, I'm tired of the sad and bad news that comes out from the continent that seems to almost have a singular way of looking at the lived narratives of Africans queer folk. I admit it is far from rosy, and we're definitely not out of the woods. However, it's the good news that doesn't get out to the media. Allow me to give you my take on the good news. The first thing is there is queer joy across the continent, much more than we're told about on the mainstream. Last year, 2 openly queer individuals ran for public office in Namibia during the last general election. Since the decriminalization of homosexual acts, activists from mostly the gay and lesbian groups in Namibia are being actively engaged by the government. More members of the community are now going to receive services at public health facilities. SOGI training is being incorporated into training health practitioners in the country. Botswana's new president is an ally of the LGBTQ community. In the Seychelles, the Penal Code Amendment Act of 2024 introduced new protections against hate crimes and hate speech by incorporating protected characteristics into the Penal Code. Section 5 of that act defines protected characteristics to include race, religion, lack of belief, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, sex characteristics, political affiliation, and HIV/AIDS status. From August 27th to 29th this year, the 4th edition of Pride Africa was convened in Kigali, Rwanda, bringing together over 110 activists from 31 African countries. I was there. I counted them. In August this year, the High Court in Kenya ruled in favor of a transgender athlete, awarding her approximately 130,000 rand in compensation for violation of her constitutional rights. The court further directed the government of Kenya to initiate and table a bill addressing the rights of transgender persons. On the September 6th, just across the border from here, members of the LGBTQ community in Eswatini hosted Pride on the same day as the country's Independence Day. We are seeing more young folk expressing themselves openly on social media. And there are activist groups in almost every African country. Some are more open than others, but the African queer community is vibrant, active, steadfast, and proud of who they are. June, which is Northern Pride, is proof of that. There are marches and parties, whether public or in private, being held, and you see that during that month. Many of these events may not be headline-worthy, but are progressive efforts being made to create a community or safer spaces for the LGBTQ individuals on the continent. However, to be objective, there's still the bad news. Closures of centers, like Professor George had mentioned, and organizations that serve the community have taken place across the continents. Jobs have been lost. Shortages are being seen in distribution of HIV self-testing kits and condoms. Reduced outreach campaigns, and we're beginning to witness low adherence to HIV treatment. At a macro level, we have seen anti-homosexuality laws being introduced in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Uganda. In Ghana, Malawi, and back home in Kenya, there have been mutterings or steps towards enacting or tabling anti-LGBTQ laws. But the hand of our queer ancestors, I would like to believe, has stalled this progress. Even though their progress has been slowed down, I believe the work of these bills is already at play. That is to create an environment of fear, hate, violence, ignorance, misinformation, and disinformation against the community. Homophobic sections of the public now feel emboldened to discriminate against members of the queer community. You can be denied access to basic rights just because someone perceives you to be queer. Trans individuals are usually the first targets of violence and discrimination. False words are not only evil in themselves, but they infect the soul with evil, says Plato. We are living during a period of lies. Fake news lurks across various lands, and fiction is more appealing than truth. Homosexuality is an African and is an import of the West. They are promoting, they are recruiting, they are a threat to family values. They are paid, they have been given money by Illuminati. They are anti-religion. We need to protect our cultural values. Sadly, these lies are being repeated over and over again at the pulpit, by politicians, by the press, and making its way to the health practitioner and the public. The greatest enemy of truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. Those words were spoken by former American President John F. Kennedy. Last year, as part of my work, I had the opportunity to train Kenyan journalists on how to cover the LGBTQ community and our issues. From the get-go, the room was filled with tension. The activists didn't trust the media, citing that the media is only interested in sensational queer stories and are insensitive with their coverage of queer lives, therefore exposing individuals to violence, and there's always the constant invasion of privacy. The journalists blamed their editors for not allowing them to present more humane or positive stories from the community for fear of being accused of being allies or promoters of homosexuality. Furthermore, the journalists themselves thought being homosexual or even coverage of our issues was against the law in Kenya. They were shocked to realize that no such law exists. Misinformation and disinformation sadly abounds. This environment of falsehood and fear is the same environment within which public health systems operate in, and when it comes to dealing with the LGBTQ community. In Kenya, it has made members of my community mistrust public health practitioners. One of my proudest and yet bittersweet moments for me as a gay Kenyan happened on the 24th of May, 2019. The venue was the High Court in the capital, Nairobi. The case, Repeal 162. The goal, to decriminalize the colonial penal code that had outlawed homosexual acts. I remember that morning calling on Kenya to be brave, because a positive ruling for us would have a huge effect on the region and beyond. We as a community and our allies descended on the court's premises. We showed up in our finest and flew the rainbow flag high. We were hopeful and unafraid. We were challenging an unjust law, a law that not only criminalizes male homosexual sex, but also criminalizes all other forms of sex between adults that doesn't result in procreation. That's the bit of the law no one tells you about. The courtroom was jam-packed, a little bit more than today, Folks spilled out into the corridor and stairwells, keenly listening to the 3-judge bench ruling that was being broadcast live on Kenyan TV. Sadly, we lost that case. Tears were shed and a sense of fear quickly set in. That evening, the first member of the community was attacked in one of the city's high-density settlements, and there were scattered incidents of violence in pockets of the country. LGBTQ organizations went quiet for a bit for their own safety and licked their wounds. But we were brave, even though Kenya wasn't. We attempted not just to decriminalize homosexual sex, but sex as well. Back in 2006, when I joined the movement, we could only dream of such moves. We were still playing small, wanting to play down ourselves in order to be deemed respectful in society's eyes. We played to their rules and made ourselves invisible. Almost 20 years later, the Kenyan queer movement and several other movements across the continent are no longer playing small, but they are playing smart. Enter 2023, and Uganda makes the headlines again. And I quote Ruth Mugenzi, the team lead of an LGBTQ media group, Kuchu Times. Ruth says, "The new law has not only taught me to be bold. Yes, I've been afraid, but I've now gotten to the level where I've created spaces of safety for myself and for those within my immediate circle. I'm living my life truthfully, and I intend to enjoy the safety I've managed to create over the years." Ruth Mugenzi. Just over a month ago, I was in Uganda when I heard the news of the anti-homosexuality law being enacted in Burkina Faso. I was disappointed, but I was not disheartened, because I was in a country that had gone through a similar path and whose activists have decided to fight back, trying to ensure that 20 years of their work in creating safe spaces for Ugandans was not going to be lost. They are down, but they are far from being out. In spite of the enactment of the Anti-Homosexuality Act, or AHA 2023, or AHA 2 as it is commonly known in Uganda, Uganda's Ministry of Health in August of that year, 3 months after the signing of that draconian law, announced in a statement to health workers and providers and ordered them not to do the following: to not deny services to any client who presents themselves for services, not to discriminate or stigmatize any individual who seeks healthcare for any reason, gender, religion, tribe, economic, social status, or sexual orientation, to accord patients rights and ethical values, confidentiality, privacy, patient safety as stipulated in the patient's charter should be upheld each time a patient seeks healthcare services at any health facility in Uganda. And it reiterated that the Anti-Homosexuality Act does not forbid any person from seeking medical services from a health facility or hospital. Furthermore, all services should be provided in a manner that ensures safety, privacy, and confidentiality to all clients that seek health services in all public and private health facilities. That was in Uganda. Let me not deny AHA 2023 has caused a lot of harm to the LGBTQ community in Uganda. It has been heavy for them. However, it has forced them to reflect, re-strategize, reinvent, and innovate. They know who they are. To quote Pepe Onzima, the director of programs at the now deregistered group Sexual Minorities Uganda, "It has emboldened us to step into spaces we never thought we would. We never thought we'd be holding the government ransom, so to speak. We never thought we'd be sitting in the same group as the government and World Bank officials listening to us. We never ever dreamed of that happening in our wildest dreams. On behalf of the queer people in the world, we were able to do that. Pepe continues to say. We held dialogue with the executive arm of the government and have since garnered a level of political capital, and we have done that through raising awareness and giving information to the government through these dialogues. You cannot legislate how one's heart loves. And that is a truth I take refuge in. These proposed laws or campaigns that we're seeing across the continent will not turn us, and it will not make me straight. We will continue to be who we are, which is why the queer community is now owning their voices more than ever before, and digital media is providing home and space to the community in Africa. But even in online spaces, the violence, hate, and bullying is still apparent. In my opinion, that backlash, be it online or physical, is proof of the impact of our work. The decriminalization of homosexuality or homosexual acts is a win for all of us. It lessens shame and fear. It helps us tap into marginalized communities and allows all members of societies to be seen. Moreover, it leads to a healthier nation. I come from a middle-class family, and I've had access to private health all my life. But I'm grateful for the awareness that life has given me, because here in Africa, it is sometimes very easy to fall from privilege or have the silos that we exist in being burst. My late grandmother, Nyanya Memboa, as we called her, spent months at the largest referral hospital in the country, Kenyatta National Hospital, KNH. She was there for months thanks to an incident that left her covered with burn wounds. KNH, guys, or many other public hospitals in Kenya are not for the faint-hearted. During her treatment, I saw patients sharing beds, nonchalant nursing care, abandoned patients, and there was a sense of apathy that graced the corridors of KNH. You have to step into hospitals, public health facilities like KNH with hope and a prayer. You hope for the best. Pray they have the medicine available. Hope the medical staff will be kind and caring and not on strike. And pray for a speedy, painless exit out of that system. Yes, it is where resources, expertise, and ubuntu, or utu, as we say in Kenya, is needed. Being in KNH takes me out of my cushy, comfort, middle-class zone and makes me encounter the many faces of Kenya. Even with my access to private medical care, I've tried not to forget that there is another parallel or often dissimilar system of care. Nyanya's period at KNH, I believe, etched that into my psyche. My first full comprehensive sex health check was conducted at KNH as part of a survey on gay men living in Nairobi. I knew it was important to help vary the demographic of that survey, because usually it is one type of gay man that gets captured during these surveys. Middle-class, professional, gay men like myself are left out, mostly by choice, not by design. But there have been moments of surprise within our battered system. The late Ernest Thayer, a trans man, found help at KNH as he came to terms with his identity. In the book, as Fini had mentioned, We've Been Here, which is a collection of stories from LGBTQI Kenyans who are 50 years and older, Ernest tells his story, and I'm going to give you a snapshot of this. It was in 2003, he says. I wondered how there was a name for my condition. Maybe there was. I'd heard about intersex, but not transgender. Anyway, I developed some stomach complications just when I was planning to go see a doctor. The only types of doctors that I knew were gynecologists. It turned out to be fibroids, and they were becoming bothersome. But they were not the major problem to me. There was still the internal turmoil. I made my way to Kenyatta National Hospital to look for a doctor because I had money and I could afford the private wing. We spoke for almost 1 hour, and I opened up to her, revealing we spoke for almost 1 hour. I opened up to her, revealing that I felt that there was something amiss with me and that my body did not belong to me. What I really wanted her to understand from the get-go was that I was mentally stable. That was paramount to me. She told me, let us do this. Let us start with your physical problem, carry out a scan, test, and decide on what course of action once you receive the results. 3 days later, when I went back with the results, she told me that my fibroids were cancerous, though there was nothing to worry about. She put me on a month's medication immediately, but we kept on having conversations around my issue. She went on to tell me, I've had 2 or 3 other people come to this office, spoken on the same issue as you, but they never came back for their second appointment. I must say she was very reassuring and told me to see her again after a month. That is how I started my journey with Dr. Angela. Every time I would go for a physical, we'd discuss my condition. She would constantly ask me how I felt during my visit. She really wanted to know about how I felt about myself. This went on, Thaya says, for around 3 years. After 1 year, she agreed that I had a condition and told me, we are taught about these things in school, but because it is so rare to see people coming in, you cannot really pursue it any further, and you have to wait for the patients to approach us. Dr. Angela went on to tell Thaya that she knew the word for his condition, and that is how he learnt about himself. She used the word transgender and said it. That is when your body and your mind are not aligned. In 2005, Thaya says that his fibroids started becoming a problem. After going through scans, Dr. Angela told Thaya that the fibroids were not responding to medication, and she suggested a removal. To quote Thaya, I told her remove everything. She asked me to take a week to consider my decision. I was resolute about my decision and told her so when I went back to her and told her that my life felt like that of a man and had no need for my ovaries. She sat me down and told me, you have been coming here for 3 years. Firstly, you have been consistent with your medication and everything else. You are never late for your appointments, and during every consultation, you give me a concise picture of who you are. Secondly, you have never changed your stance from the first day we met, and that tells me something, that indeed you are a transgender. Usually, other women will not allow for a full ovarian removal because they still see themselves having children in the future, says Dr. Angela. But you are something very different. Therefore, I'm going to do this surgery, but after a year, you will need to start hormonal therapy. She also revealed to me that she initially thought that I was a lesbian, but she realized that that was not the case. Thaya was 28 at that time. This was in the same KNH. Thaya states that procedure offered him a new lease of life. And he quotes, I was very happy because one of the things that I struggled with was having periods when you're a man. That is not an issue for other men. I would always get depressed and uncomfortable whenever they came around. I can say from then on, my journey began. I was taking on a new turn in addition to continuing with my social transition. Ernest was lucky to have someone like Dr. Angela within the public system. In the words of the African-American writer and activist Darnell Moore, he says, if we create nuanced and accurate cultural portrayals of identity and experience, we have an opportunity to reduce stigma and change perception, impacting everything from HIV to institutional inequality. You've had my bio, BBC, doing this, doing that. But I never planned on being an activist. But I knew I wanted to tell stories, and I was fascinated by telling the African story. From listening to the BBC World Service on shortwave radio, to those who remember shortwave radio, to reading the magazine and listening to the radio program that shared the same name, Focus on Africa. Interestingly, it was on the very same BBC Focus on Africa program, while an avid listener, that I started to hear glimpses of my own journey, glimpses and hearing glimpses of me. In 2005, I heard about and read about someone like me. Reverend Jide Makoli's story on being gay and Nigerian prompted me to start owning my story and commence my journey to stepping out of the closet. As a journalist, writer, podcaster, and activist, I stand by the fact that stories can change lives. I'm a witness and beneficiary to that. That explains why I choose to be public about my story as a gay man, and more so as a gay man living with cancer. I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which is a blood cancer, in October 2015. For my first World Cancer Day commemoration that February in 2016, I went back to KNH because I wanted to be with other cancer patients. That was my new normal. There was a support group meeting happening on the hospital grounds. The journey to the expression, however, the journey to the venue, however, left an impression on me. To get there, you had to walk past the hospital morgue, and at that bodies were being released to grieving families. It was jarring. I did make it to the support group, shaken. I never went back, to be honest, until I heard that the hospice had moved to a different location. Since 2015, I found myself as an on and off ambassador of multiple myeloma. I've given numerous interviews and speaking engagements, a bit like this. I've blogged my journey where I not only speak of myeloma, but being a gay man, or more so an older gay man living with cancer. I've discovered some folks find it easier to hear about my journey with myeloma than queer sexuality. Humans are special. However, there was a sense of relief when I came out to those who cared for me during the early stages of my treatment. I thought it was important to fully present myself to the process of healing and those supporting my journey of healing. One surgeon clocked me pretty early into my treatment because there was a man in his 40s showing up for appointments either with my parents or alone. There was no sign of a significant female other. Unless health workers are trained to deal with LGBTQI patients and learn about queer realities, patients will either shun or delay their access to receiving treatment, be it public or private. I live in a country that does not recognize the rights of the LGBTQ community. Depending on where you live or work, every day exposes you to potential risk and harm. If you choose to express your sexual orientation or gender identity freely. There's a lot of social, cultural, and religious stigma that is to be encountered. I wonder, what would be the case for a masculine-presenting lesbian, effeminate men, or gender non-conforming individuals, or even trans individuals? There is no consideration or even discussion currently to address these realities within Kenya's medical fraternity. Our clinics and our hospitals lack the policies or procedures to deal with trans admissions at these facilities. How can such cases be treated, and how can we ensure that LGBTQ individuals are treated with dignity, with the dignity that they deserve when seeking medical attention? Furthermore, are oncologists aware of the risk, if any, of combining prescribed cancer treatment with hormone replacement therapy drugs? What are the potential threats to combining cancer drugs with PrEP, ARVs, or even PEP? I've asked many a practitioner, but no one seems to know there's an opportunity for research there. What form of support, medical support or otherwise, would be given to queer male patients suffering from anal, colorectal, prostate, or testicular cancer? Or what support is given to a queer woman who has to undergo a mastectomy? Are trans men at lower risk of being diagnosed with breast cancer? Should they still be checking for lumps? What kind of support should be offered to a queer woman who's been diagnosed with vaginal cancer? For the sake of the patient's peace of mind, these are concerns that need to be addressed within and outside of our queer circles. However, in an environment where openly talking about sex and sexuality is taboo and where queer sex is criminalized, How should these issues be broached by our health systems and the queer activist movement? How should the conversation be conducted without judgment, keeping in mind the safety and dignity of the individual? I've been very public about my cancer diagnosis and my queer sexuality because I feel that there's too much stigma surrounding cancer and queerness in Kenya, and it needs to be challenged. I'm not brave. I'm just being me. I knew the less baggage I carried during my treatment. I knew that the less baggage I carried during my treatment, the easier my healing would be. My self-acceptance journey has emboldened me, and I use that to fuel my work as a storyteller and activist. Shame and fear are too heavy to carry when you're fighting for your life. Shame and fear stop us from dreaming, from being seen, from being loved, or loving the way we want to love or be loved. If we cannot present ourselves as whole in either of our health systems, how are we expected to heal? Sadly, many members of the community find our health systems unsafe and have to present a different persona when dealing with healthcare providers. Makobu Kimani, in his doctoral thesis, Strengthening HIV Preventive Care Services for Transgender Women and Men who have sex with men, MSM, in coastal areas, states, healthcare providers expressed the sentiment that MSM, men who have sex with men, had deeply internalized stigma and observed that MSM patients were likely to interpret most interpersonal healthcare interactions through the lens of discrimination, thereby driving a wedge between them, the MSM, and the system. When we decriminalize homosexuality or homosexual acts, we create a safer and healthier society for all. Everybody wins. It becomes safer for women. By creating an environment where sexuality is openly discussed, we should be able to challenge societal expectations of how manhood should exist. We have to recognize the emotional harm and the risk that some closeted men put onto their unsuspecting female partners. Recently released figures on HIV in Kenya indicate that women are still bearing the brunt of that disease. The national HIV prevalence rate stands at 3.3, with higher rates amongst women at 4.5 compared to men at 2.2. The decriminalization of homosexual acts or homosexuality would finally allow for comprehensive sex education to finally make its way into the education curriculum. Honest conversations can be had with young learners who in turn grow into their own sexuality without thinking that conversations of sex or sexuality are taboo. In Kenya, you often hear the sex being described as tabia mbaya or bad manners. Yeah. Decriminalization allows for the dispelling of misperceptions of our bodies and allows for pleasure to supplant shame. It will allow for the years of incorporating knowledge and skills garnered by peer educators engaging with the community at grassroots level and using that knowledge to raise awareness of other diseases outside of HIV. Actually, I mentioned it earlier, with the closure of community or outreach centers that serve the LGBTQI and sex worker communities, thanks to the shutting down of USAID and also due to reduced funding. Public systems have a way of inventing and innovating ways of how to integrate individuals or programs. We can no longer be serving marginalized communities from the peripheries. We exist together within our societies. And as a storyteller, we must learn how to use storytelling to dispel myths around our bodies, around pleasure, how to protect that pleasure, and how to mitigate risk. and also illustrate when one part of the body aches, the whole body aches. Let us have conversations on developing a language that does away with shame and fear, but builds individuals to love all of themselves. And we have been here before. The early days of the AIDS pandemic are proof of that. We integrated across the lines. We talked to one another. We cannot let the language of hate and fear find its way to the place of healing. We need to discover avenues that exist at continental ministerial level where policy and not politics will create environments for the inclusivity of all sexualities. Globally, we are seeing the Gen Z queer communities create safe spaces and community for themselves online. They are seeing themselves. They are telling their own stories. But are these spaces safe, healthy, or accessible? I still dream of gum clinics finding their way into our public health systems across the continent. Remember that guy who was 31 years old? He still dreams. For these clinics, whether individuals who attend these clinics, whether they are out or not, are able to access care, counsel, and treatment. We all know that adage that says it takes a village to raise a child. But I have learned that it takes a village to also hold a person in their journey of healing. We are that village. You are that village. As children of this beautiful continent, our Utu, our Ubuntu is not just our superpower. It is not just an act of seeing the other. It is also an act of love. Love not only wins, but love heals. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm thinking of humanity, hope, healing. You really brought together so many different elements in terms of covering your story, the stories of others, and really bringing the best of for us to learn from other places in Africa as well, and not to take advantage, I think, a little bit of the privileges we have here, but not to presume about other contexts and other struggles. So thank you so much, Kevin. I wonder, we are running behind, but I think it's a wonderful opportunity to, if colleagues have reflections, questions, I wonder if we can open it up for a little while before we move to the reception. The floor is open. So we have one person in the back. Anyone else who'd like to follow? Great. 3 on this side. Any takers on this side? Going. Okay. We have, I think, 4 people. Do you want to take them all together, or how would you like? Should we get a pen?
Just right on the back of the switch, yeah.
Okay. So
I'll take maybe 2 at a time.
Okay, 2 at a time. So I think do we have a roving mic?
Yes.
So we have the gentleman with the hat. And then let's get the 2 people with, oh no, there are 3 people with hats. Okay. Okay, go ahead. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Peter van Heusden. I'm here from UWC at the Bioinformatics Institute. I actually don't even know how to ask this question, but just one word: surveillance. Right? I work in disease surveillance, and I mean it's alarming because I mean I look at my colleagues' data and they're very, very, very far away from people, and I look at the patterns and I can see that these are queer lives that they're talking about, but they're things they don't see because queer people don't exist, right? So, on the other hand, surveillance is a horrible word. You don't want to be surveilled. So, I don't know if you've got any thoughts. I mean, I barely have coherent ones myself on how to serve people, not make them invisible, while also not getting us into that horrible police-like word of surveillance.
Should we take one more?
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
take two at a time.
Thank you so much for that profound presentation. My name is Savuka from Desmond Tutu Health Foundation. I'm also an advocate for gender diversity and human rights. And I hear the idea of research being a very important part of pushing the boundaries and perhaps also joining different fields, different nationalities in challenges, misconceptions and stereotypes. What would be the ideal formation to challenge laws, to challenge the marginalizations of queer identities across Africa? I know in South Africa we have privilege that you mentioned as well. So we are the better standing. We do have our challenges here, but I don't think as grave as other spaces in Africa. So what can you suggest for us as academics, but also in a political place to change the narrative and stand in solidarity with other organizations and institutions doing the same work around the world? More particularly in Africa. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much for the two questions, comments there. In terms of the first one, I think it's a question of asking ourselves constantly, who's not at the table? And that's the thing I do, who is not at the table? Who is not, I just think I've been so sensitized by my sisters within the movement. Like every time I see a panel or a conversation, I'm like, where are the women? Where are the women? And what type of women are here? Are we seeing disabled women? And if you program yourself to almost ask who is not at the table, you will draw people, you will have eyes, you'll have eyes and ears to see what else needs to be included, who else needs to be included. I just think it's a matter of being sensitive, to be honest. And I think sometimes we just have to bring it back the human. Sometimes we get caught up with words and research and everything that we forget. And as an activist, I think we are also guilty as activists that we forget that the work that we do is about humans. Usually we get caught up talking about log frames and theory of change and all that. And then I'm like, but where are the stories, ne? I think ask yourself who is not at the table and where are the stories. And then how to challenge that, good question. For me, it's a little bit about the festival that I co-created, storytelling. My last year of curating the festival was this year, and for the first time this was the 14th edition of the Art Film Festival, and it was such joy to realize that all the movies there came from either Africa or the Global South. We had evolved. There were stories that we, the audience, the various publics were able to relate. And a lot of these stories were in other languages outside of English. We had a first film from Namibia, and that you, forgive me for me saying it, Iherero, it had Iherero in there. We had movies from Nigeria. We had movies from India in Tamil, not even in Hindu, in Tamil and Telugu. And I think it is important to let these stories be told in the languages of the people. And I think that way you're able to show them in the parliaments, you're able to show them in the ministries. Sometimes people, if we have to normalize and humanize the existence of minorities. We have to tell those stories, and I think that's how you get into spaces. And I think it's a question of drawing synergies. If I was in Gambia earlier this year for the Africa Commission for People and Human Rights, and there was so much talk and everything about human rights, but for some people, if you show them a film of what's happening in Lesotho, maybe people might actually realize that there are also Basotho who are queer. We must tell our stories. And storytelling, like I said, is important in bringing down walls. ever since was it Nigeria, the Same-Sex Marriage SSMP Prohibition Act was enacted a few years ago. But at the film festival, we get a movie from Nigeria almost constantly and every year. Stories matter, art matters. And I think it's important for maybe the art and the science, art and the political to find a space to sit together.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I think that was very eloquent and speaks to the hearts of many here and the types of not just evidence building, but what are the stories that they support in affecting change. There were 2 other hands. I know we're late, but I wonder if we can, and then we'll call it a night. Yeah?
Good evening. Thank you so much, the organizers of the lecture tonight. My name is Tinashe. I'm from the People's Health Movement. I'm also a student in the School of Public Health here. Kelvin, drawing from your media experience, we understand that media houses are owned by certain groups and certain individuals, and they draw in their own narrative in broadcasting or in issuing out whatever news they want to issue out. What do you think is missing in this newsroom to shift the perspective of issues and the struggle around the LGBTIQ issues, especially in countries where LGBTI families are still being persecuted? Last one, if you may allow me, being somebody who's coming from a township, we've seen a lot of violence, GBV, school bullying, and other forms of violence, which are mainly affecting women and children, including LGBTIQ families themselves. What are the chances of a society where LGBTIQ come out into reality, accepted, and so forth? Thank you.
There was one more question, I think, or 2 more.
I think if we just take one more.
Okay.
I know we're late.
Thank you very much. Kevin, that was a very good, speech and storytelling. Thank you for that. My take on it, or my question, or what I would like you to reflect on is the whole issue around HIV as an entry point to the queer community. So we know that the policymakers have used that as kind of like a way to engage with governments. And they have used aid. Like we talked about the withdrawal of UNAIDS and other US aid, which actually for the most part funds a lot of the programs here. But there's a tension within queer communities about this entry point, because they, for the most part, see it as them being seen as vectors of disease and not focusing on them as whole human beings with agency, that want to love, that want to exist, that want to have rights as citizens and participate in citizenry. So, yes, there was huge relevance at some point as an entry point to introduce it, but nothing has come after that. You know, it's like there's been no innovation around pushing the envelope past HIV at the level of policy. So I don't know whether you have any reflections on that.
I'll just start with that. I agree with you 100%. There's been no innovation in how we're dealing with HIV on the continent. Especially, we see it in Kenya, especially with the gay and bisexual and the MSM groups. There's just no newness there. You know, we've seen some of the LBQ, the lesbian, bisexual, and queer movements being a lot more dynamic and even questioning, like, yeah, we're not at most risk, but they're programming differently. And I think for them, they're not seeing themselves as victims anymore. And I think we as men, and I think sometimes even as queer men, bring on our patriarchy into these spaces. Straight up. I think we're not calling out ourselves even as gay men. I think we need to call ourselves out a lot more and say we have to be creative. We have to be innovative. We have to broaden our thinking that this is an issue that, yes, primarily affects gay men, but it affects all of us. You know? And also, I think maybe it's time for us gay men to start talking to other men, straight men, and saying, heck, guys, this also affects you as well. I just think there needs to be creative and innovative, out of the box thinking when it comes to programming, you know, and I think we'll start seeing some movement there. But I agree with you 100%. And then to Tinashe, thank you for your questions and comments there. I think what is missing in the newsroom, forgive me for saying this, is balls. It's as simple as that, Booty. You know, there's a time we'd say the pen has stopped being mightier than the sword. People are thinking of, you know, advertisers. They're thinking of, you know, wanting I don't know whether the same thing happens here, but sometimes the government is the biggest advertiser in our press, notices and stuff for the tenders. So like we start speaking against them, then we're going to use that advertising. There was a time that I love being a journalist, to be honest. I still do that. We spoke for the voiceless, ne? And a lot of these newsrooms don't speak for the voiceless anymore. So balls, fam. And then I think another element of what we need to do in our societies, in the townships, I think we also just start speaking to the local influencers there. Who are the people who hold sway within our communities? Let us start using them. Let us use the structures that exist within these communities to bring influence. In Kenya, we keep on saying we have to start using a lot more Kiswahili when it comes to talking about big issues. We have to start using a lot of local language, which is why I spoke about we have to use a language that people connect with. That is needed. That is needed. It's not a question of likes or followers or retweets. It's a question of being human. And I think the more we bring the human, the more we bring individuals who can relate to these realities, we start seeing a shift in the needle. Thank you.
Thank you, for being so eloquent. I know this is a longer program than usual, but I think it's been very rich. So I want to please call Professor Olagoke to come and do the closing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin Wachiro, for honoring our invite, but also for telling the human story. You did it so eloquently. And you not only did that, you also gave us researchers' assignments, homework. So thank you for that too. I also want to thank Professor Sue Focus. We say this every year, but you did allow us the opportunity to work with David and sharing him with us when he was here and even now after he's gone. I also want to thank your children, represented by Lisa, who's here, and your grandchild, Ella, Rory, Ben, Oscar, and a few others. You got them all, and your entire family. That's what I meant. I want to thank our rector, Professor Robert Balfour, for honoring our invite. At first invite, it was quick. We deeply, deeply appreciate you coming to be with us, to show your interest. I know when you visited us last year, you said, "Oh, invite me, I'll come." And you're here. So we deeply appreciate that amidst all your busy schedule, you're showing your interest in supporting our school, our research, and everything that we do. I also want to thank my direct boss, Professor Anita Padmanabhanuni. She's also been a great supporter of our school. I run to her a lot, and she's always like, yeah, with any letters that I need and support that I need also. We thank you for being here. And I know we're going to be bringing you here a lot, so fasten your seatbelt. I also want to thank my other colleagues who are here, HODs. I see Tuli in the room. He doesn't want to be identified, but I got you. All right, thank you for coming and supporting us, Tuli. I want to thank David Sanders' friends, Professor Leslie London carrying on the good work, and he's here. Also with Melanie Alperston, thank you for all the good work that you do. We see it, and we also benefit from the work that you do. The People's Health Movement, thank you for also carrying out the good work and for supporting Professor Sanders' memory. Thank you for energizing the lecture today, as you always do, and the flavor and the spice that you bring. We appreciate that. I want to come home and thank my colleagues, starting with our security people, the cleaners who make this place beautiful for us. They couldn't join us because they have to be at their duty posts and stuff. We also want to thank my colleagues that I work with in the room all the time, my admin staff and my academic staff of the school, also carrying on the legacy. I want to thank Professor Asha George for carrying on this, supporting this lecture, and also want to thank the National Research Foundation for the finance that goes into supporting this lecture. I want to come back to Kevin. Do you want to step up?
I have no more words.
Thank you for your lecture. We appreciate it. And thank you for coming all the way. All right. I know at this time it is past dinner time. Most people eat dinner much earlier. I hope I've not missed anyone. My events team, I almost missed them. Thank you for putting all this together. You heard Kevin say some beautiful words when he came in. That's such a beautiful thing that you did. So thank you for putting this event together. And the AVS colleagues, they always come right here when we call on them. And all the technical people in the background that we do not see, thank you very much. Let's have some food.